At least 2 explosions outside Kabul airport in Afghanistan today. Multiple confirmed casualties, including U.S. Marines. This comes after Western nations warned of an imminent terror threat. Questions around how many Americans have been evacuated from Afghanistan and how many are still stuck there. This comes as the deadline to get everyone out is fast approaching. And a new study shows that the cumulative healthcare costs for U.S. veterans could be as high as $2.5 trillion by 2050. That's double what reports have predicted before, and it's raising concerns about whether the government will be able to take care of its war vets over the next several decades. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Some sombering news coming out of Afghanistan. At least 2 explosions went off Thursday near the airport in Kabul. Multiple casualties confirmed. The Pentagon saying the blast led to a number of U.S. and civilian casualties. Among those dead, 4 U.S. Marines. A Taliban spokesman told Reuters the initial explosion came from a suspected suicide bomb and left at least 13 dead, including children. And a health official said the explosions also claimed 60 Afghan lives. It's been called a complex attack. U.S. officials saying the explosions are the result of ISIS-K suicide bombers who detonated in the crowd as Afghans waited to get to the airport. The explosions came after a warning by Western nations of an imminent terror threat. The U.S. Embassy in Kabul advised U.S. citizens at a number of gates at the airport to leave immediately, noting security threats outside the gates. According to a U.S. defense official, the U.S. believed ISIS-K wants to create mayhem at the airport and that it has intelligence streams suggesting it is capable and planning to carry out multiple attacks.
My main concern is that ISIS-K would look to deploy a massive bomb or a team of bombers to strike simultaneously.
ISIS-K, the K is for Khorasan, an area around the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. ISIS-K claims to be a branch of the main ISIS terror group, which gained power in Syria and Iraq 7 years ago. Experts say ISIS-K, comprised of some veteran jihadists from Syria and elsewhere, has lost ground and manpower since 2018, but still has a presence in eastern Afghanistan and has formed cells in Kabul. In total, according to a UN report, they are believed to have between 1,500 and 2,200 fighters in Afghanistan.
A lot of these are former Taliban who slapped on the ISIS patch in order to sort of make themselves the biggest, baddest guys on the block.
But ISIS-K is now a sworn enemy of the Taliban.
The Taliban are fighting them. Really, it's local rivalries.
So why, more broadly, have the 2 notorious terror groups turn on each other?
For a number of reasons. Those range from ideological to political to military. Frankly, ISIS doesn't believe in a political agenda. ISIS believes that only God can rule. And even though the Taliban is attempting to establish an Islamic emirate, that's not enough for ISIS. ISIS is a bit more hardcore.
And so hardcore, according to analyst Colin Clark, that ISIS-K is thought to be even more draconian than the Taliban. In areas they control, he says they impose harsh Sharia law. They execute civilians and others who they suspect are spies.
They want to attract and recruit the most ardent sociopaths in the country, and their calling card is this, rapacious and wanton violence against anyone that stands in their way. That actually helps them bring in other fighters into the organization that have a similar mindset.
Some of those fighters have been sprung from Afghan prisons. ISIS-K has carried out several devastating suicide bombing attacks in Afghanistan in recent years, including an attack on a school for girls this spring, which, according to a Pentagon assessment, killed at least 68 people, most of them girls. Another threat from ISIS-K that analysts are watching for.
They could wreak havoc around the airport by taking a shot at some of the aircraft that are taking off from and landing at Hamid Karzai International Airport. That's a great concern right now.
Some terror analysts say ISIS-K is not likely going to be able to overthrow the Taliban, partly because the Taliban has a much larger number of fighters. ISIS-K is a sworn enemy of the Taliban. The group has formed cells in Kabul, which have carried out a number of devastating suicide attacks in and beyond the Afghan capital since 2016. The explosions have also complicated evacuation efforts, which are already on a tight deadline. With less than a week to go before the August 31st withdrawal deadline, U.S. evacuation efforts are ramping up in Afghanistan. A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is urging President Biden to ignore his August 31st deadline. Thousands are still thought to be trying to leave Kabul, and they might not make it out by the end of the month.
And so the question before us now is, are we going to keep our deadline, or are we going to keep our promise?
Afghan war veteran Kristen Rouse is trying to help get Afghan allies out. She says in the last day or two, Afghans haven't been able to fly on military flights and charters have dried up.
I saw that photo of a mostly empty plane and I cried. Seats are empty, the airlift is there, but people are not permitted access. These are it's like a locked castle. Democrat Andy Kim says this isn't about Republican or Democrat. It comes down to what is the worth of America's word.
It's about America, and it's about the expectation of what the American handshake means to those that were willing to put their lives at risk to be able to help us.
Republican Michael McCall agrees.
We had a promise that we would get them out. How can they trust America anymore if we violate our trust and our promises?
The Pentagon says it'll continue evacuating people until the U.S. leaves next Tuesday. But during the final days, they'll focus on getting U.S. troops and equipment out. And decisions by Biden to stay longer could reignite fighting between the Taliban and Western troops, ruining the airlift. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told reporters on Wednesday as many as 1,500 Americans remain in Afghanistan.
Since August 14th, we've evacuated at least 4,500 U.S. citizens, and likely more. More than 500 of those Americans were evacuated in just the last day alone.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that on August 14th, there were around 6,000 Americans who wanted to leave Afghanistan. Of those, the State Department has evacuated 4,500 and contacted an additional 500 with instructions on how to reach the airport. They continue reaching out to the other 1,000 Americans who are still in Afghanistan, confirming whether they still plan to leave. A reporter asked Blinken whether the Biden administration is willing to take responsibility for the shortcomings in the evacuation process.
About taking responsibility. I take responsibility. I know the president has said he takes responsibility. And I know all of my colleagues across government feel the same way.
Another question is whether the U.S. will engage with the Taliban in the future.
If it makes good on its commitments to allow people who want to leave Afghanistan to leave, that's a government we can work with. If it doesn't, we will make sure that we use every appropriate tool at our disposal to isolate that government.
Blinken promises that even after the military withdraws on August 31st, his department will help Americans leave Afghanistan. As for Afghan evacuees, the Department of Homeland Security is granting some of them humanitarian parole. They can now enter the U.S. without a visa. Since the Taliban took over on August 14th, a total of 88,000 people have been evacuated. Thousands have arrived in the U.S., but the Pentagon says another 10,000 are still at the Kabul airport, awaiting departure. The Pentagon also said on Wednesday that U.S. troops have not rescued any Americans in Afghanistan outside of Kabul. That's despite having the capability to do so. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said the reason why the distance is so small is because the focus of the mission is on protecting the airport, where flights are departing regularly with Afghans, Americans, and others. He adds, so far there's been 3 missions, including one to the Barron Hotel to rescue a group of 169 people who were struggling to make it to the airport. Kirby added all 3 have been a short duration and a short distance. And according to the Association of Wartime Allies, 18,000 Afghan interpreters are still in the country. The group says they'll continue working to get them out, even after the August 31st deadline. Now, what about the cost of war, not just on the battlefield, but after? Research from Brown University's Costs of War project says caring for service members who joined after 9/11 will reach $2.2 trillion to $2.5 trillion from 2001 to 2050. The report shows this includes how much was already paid out in medical care and benefits, as well as projected future costs that are already baked into the system. The study also found the cost has gone up, The federal government's costs for caring for veterans has doubled over the past 2 decades. According to this study, it's gone up to 4.9% of the total budget in 2020. That's up from 2.4% in 2001, even though there are about 7 million less veterans now. The Harvard University professor who authored the study points out a couple of reasons why the costs are increasing so much. The reasons for this are that troops who joined after 9/11 actually went on longer deployments more often. They are more exposed to combat, and more of them lived through injuries and had serious disabilities from those injuries. Also, they required more complex medical treatments. Further reasons include veterans having more access to government benefits, better systems for submitting disability and healthcare claims, and more services for helping them get jobs after the military. And now, before we end, in some lighter news, it's National Dog Day. It's celebrated every August 26th. The day encourages people to share their lives with dogs of all breeds, both our own pets and those who work to save lives and help others. Those wanting to celebrate are encouraged to walk their dog, or if there's no dog at home, to ask to walk the neighbor or friend's dog. Other ways include donating to a local dog shelter or animal charity. And for bigger steps, those include adopting or fostering a dog. And of course, in this day and age, those celebrating are encouraged to share on social media. Here's to man's best friend. The American wildlife photographer Roger Karras once said, "Dogs are not our whole life, but they make our lives whole." But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.